Greetings, pilots, and welcome to Fly's Flight Academy. My name is Kovakis, otherwise known as Flyteco on SWTOR, and today we're going to be beginning the long trek through the multiple ships that you have within the suite of GSF. Today we're going to be starting out with the strike fighters. These are the most common, or the most generic ship type. They are usually used for a decent bit of everything. More or less, they're your get out there and do everything kind of play styles to an extent. They're really solid, and in my opinion, as we went over with the Starguard, they are some of the better ships to learn with, as their mechanics and kits aren't too in depth. Even on the higher end with with ships like the Clarion, they aren't that intense. So I'm going to be breaking these up into three parts. It's going to be episode 3A, 3B, and 3C, as I believe that these take a while to break down and want to be as thorough as I possibly can while keeping it as short as I possibly can, so that way you guys can sift through these a little bit easier. So starting out, we're going to go over the first ship you find in GSF. This is the Starguard. I know I touched on it a little bit when we kind of went over why it was an okay starting ship. However, it does have a fairly high top end, and as such, I feel the need that it needs its own entire episode. So, the generalization for the ship, it is the most basic ship at its core. It really just kind of does the left click to play the game kind of thing, and that's not necessarily a bad thing. Left clicking and teaching yourself to aim is an essential part of GSF. Today, this is timestamping this as of whatever today is, the day of recording. I actually don't know what today, the 16th. As of January 16th, I actually had my first ever 23 kill game, and I played that using only gunships. And for reference, gunships require a lot of aim. So if I didn't learn how to aim a long time ago, I probably wouldn't have had that good of a match now. So I'm very proud of that. But that said, these are still an aggressive archetype ship. These are quintessentially more of a dogfighting type ship, where you really just kind of want to have scrappy fights and use the full extent of your twin primaries to shred people down a bit and get through the enemy team realistically. Moving into the components, we're going to be starting from top to bottom instead of bottom to top. I am not going to cover minor components or the crew in these videos, as I think that knowing what they are in a build guide is good enough. They don't add anything aside from stats, and realistically, the only thing I will have to talk about is your co-pilot choice. But even that's build reliant, so I'm going to leave those out entirely. I don't think that they need to be in these videos, as it will add a significant amount of time to these videos that doesn't need to be there. So starting with your primary weapons on the Starguard, I designate this slot personally as the ion cannon only slot. Generally speaking, you're going to want to start every single fight with your ion cannons out, as your ion cannons shred shields and sort of do a minor power drain to other power types. That doesn't happen realistically until tier 4, when you get these two. Tier 4 and tier 5 really amp up the shred that this lets you accomplish. What these are meant for, you start your engage. They have decently long range at 5750. It's not too long, not too short. It's kind of in the mid ground, which makes it actually perfectly suitable for any of the weapon pairings that you could have. And it lets you remove pesky shields, which means all your other weapons, will more than likely be doing straight hull damage, and that's really solid, especially when you consider how high hull damage values get. Shredding someone in maybe like 2 seconds tops is fairly common, and it's not unheard of, especially with like rapid fire lasers. Those shred really hard. They're close range, but who cares? For your tier 4 and tier 5, you're going to be picking drain energy power instead of increased range. This is mostly because The increased range doesn't, it's a 5%er, which is kind of weak. If it was 10%, maybe it'd be a little bit better, but even so. Draining energy power or draining engine power for the short little period of time you're doing this isn't terrible. You're not really a utilitarian ship, so you're not really aiming to just perma-shred someone and deplete their engines completely, but if you can give yourself any advantage, it's appreciated. So draining engine power while you're shooting someone already is fairly nice. At tier 5, you're taking drain shield power. This just flat out siphons more shields instead of doing damage. It just eats the power, which I've never quite understood myself. I do know it helps to just cripple shields entirely rather than like leaving them a little easier to recover, but I don't quite understand how the shield power pool works. To my knowledge, I always thought that the power capacity is the power pool, which I think it is. So you're just eating flat shields and on top of your damage. So I think this is just a flat 40 damage increase, which is kind of crazy when you think about it, considering these already do 1879 at their closest point to shields. That's a lot of damage, and you're probably gonna like shred through shields in 3 shots realistically at even long ranges, so that's nice. I guess it really just makes it do that more. The other option is drain weapon power. This is useless. Draining weapon power doesn't do anything for you. Draining weapon power essentially says you're conceding to the burst and you want to drag a fight out longer and win through advantages, which is silly when you already have an advantage in damage. So just take the shield power drain. It's really strong. You'll like it, trust me. Ion cannons, as I stated, is staple to the ship. Not a single build should go without it, as it really just kind of makes the ship what it is. I believe it's the only ship that has ion cannons, now that I think about it. Which means it's the only ship that can nuke someone really hard with its left click. So it's nice. It's good. It's a fun playstyle too. It kind of keeps the mind active. Moving on to primary weapon slot 2. I designate the slot for the other 3 options. This is the freest 3 options you've ever had, as every single one is incredible, even quad lasers. I personally am going to do these a bit different. I'm going to go by range instead of the way they're presented here. So I'm going to start with rapid fire cannons. These are your short range variant. They have an extremely fast time to kill, as they have an extremely high rate of fire. Once you tear through shields, these do a lot of hull damage, so it makes it really easy to clean people up. I have noticed over my time running with this ship, the short range really means nothing. This is my staple loadout. It feels really smooth compared to the other 2 options. It's not necessarily better than the other 2 options. As I stated, they're all really good in their own rights. It's just another flavor. These kind of have, I'm not going to say the highest skill ceiling in the world. They're kind of average, just due to the fact that the short range, you kind of need to know how to fly in more aggressive patterns, and you kind of switch up your flight path to make your engagement distances that less of an issue. But overall, it's really strong. For tier 4 and tier 5, you're going to be picking improved firing arc and tracking. The crit does nothing. These don't really benefit from crit damage. If anything does, it'd be quad lasers just due to their high crit damage. But everything else is flat 50%, and 8% crit in GSF, while okay, isn't particularly the highest in the world. And generally speaking, the Starguard is not a crit ship. But even building it with like straight a crit build with quad laser and the crit crew and just everything like that, it really does not gain any benefit from crit. So it's kind of just a toss in the dark. But what this will do for you, it'll increase your firing arc, which means you can aim essentially further onto your screen and still hit people on like the far edges of a turn. And your weapon tracking penalty will be reduced. This essentially means your accuracy on the further reaches of your aim it's not going to be as bad. So it flattens out at like 5%, I think. So that's not bad. Tier 5, you're taking increased hull damage. This is the staple option for literally everything on the Starguard, as you're burning shields with Ion Cannon. You really don't need the increased shield damage on any of the choices, so just more damage to hulls is really good. It helps you finish people a lot quicker, too. Moving on to your mid-range option. I don't really quantify this as a mid-range. I still think it's not short range either. It's kind of in that weird spot because this mid-range I consider to be 5,500 meters. Considering long range is usually like the heavy cannon option, which sits around 7,500. 6,000 I'd consider mid long. 55 to 5,000 is mid range. 45 to 5 is mid low, and 45 and below is low. So quad lasers are kind of in that mid-long range, which is actually beneficial to them here, as they line up quite well with the ion cannon range. They'd line up better with that 5% range, but that doesn't particularly matter. What these really accomplish with that little range adjustment is with ion cannons, you are burning a lot of engine to get within range. And by having a little bit of extra range, you're able to push out your engagement distance after you clear shields. And this lets you chase a little bit more effectively than you otherwise would. So it's pretty beneficial to you because it just lets you clear people on the disengaged, sort of. It's kind of weird, but in practice it does work very well. You more or less just kind of have to use them and test them to see how they feel. I don't really know how to explain it, as I don't really use these that much. I still do every once in a while, mostly just because I like the look. But in practice, I believe one of these two is slightly better. But I have seen people get a ton of mileage out of quad lasers, so I never write them down. Their normal damage is fairly high by itself, so I like it. It's not the worst. It's the only lasers you can run a viable crit build on. I wouldn't recommend it. You aren't gaining anything. If you have maybe like a Clarion or something that can buff your crit chance a little bit more, it might be worth it, but it's really, at that point, you're asking a lot of your team, because you're asking your team to also commit to crit builds, which is not great. Keeping crit variants out of GSF is nice. If you crit someone, hey, that's cool. You can kill them a little bit faster. If you don't, that's a shame, but it's okay because you know your time to kill is going to be good anyways. That said, once again, these actually have a slightly higher skill ceiling than rapid fire, in my opinion, as they are the only laser cannon option that you have that doesn't have armor penetration, meaning your skill ceiling, instead of being, well, it does still include aim and all the other stuff that the other ones do, but this now includes target prioritization, because you really don't want to be shooting high armor targets, as your damage is going to drop really, really fast, and you don't want that. You want to kill people as fast as possible. So this makes it good for killing squishies, but if you face a bomber that does some bombers, and this isn't a common thing in current meta. As I said before, it's January of 2021, and ever since, like, I want to say 3 years ago, the armor meta has not been a thing, as armor penetration is just easy to come by. So you won't really see armored targets, but the times you do, you're gonna feel that damage reduction. So generally speaking, more of the time, avoid bombers. Go for your gunships, scouts, other strikes, and you'll be pretty far off. Have your team deal with bombers. If you could still fight bombers, you'll just do, like I said, it'll take you a little bit longer to kill, but that's okay. You'll still kill them in the end, and that's really what you want to accomplish. Moving into your tier 4 and tier 5 options. These are diagonal pairs. If you're going the non-crit option, you're taking reduced power cost, as these have a really high weapon power draw. Even with the reduction, it's 18.3 a second, which is really high. Without it, it's 20.7, so you really, really need this if you're not going for a quote-unquote burst-type build. And its pair is increased hull damage. Like I said, it just helps you kill things a little bit faster. The opposite pair is the crit pair. This lets you do higher crit damage in kind of a weird way. It doesn't read that increases crit damage, because I don't think it does. Oh no, it does. Okay, so it is just a flat 15% crit hit damage. This is just read weird. I don't know why it says. I don't know why it's written the way it does. It could have just said crit hit damage increased by 15% and we would have understood. But this to me, it always gives me like a second damage number, and that's kind of why I always thought it does something different, but that could just be my mind being crazy, so there's that. And its pair is just increased crit chance, so to help you pull well build off a little bit better. Moving on to your actual long range option. To my knowledge, this is actually the longest range heavy laser cannons can get. So that's actually really nice. Heavy laser cannons are far from suffering from range, but giving them more range is nice. So there's that. Their time to kill is actually really strong at the longer ranges, as its damage fall off doesn't really happen. It has low accuracy penalties. It kind of stays accurate the further away you are from someone, because the second you start getting into your firing arc to track people, its accuracy does start to hammer down. So just try and keep your reticle as close to the middle as possible, and you're more than likely going to 2 to 3 shot someone after you clear the shields, so it's pretty strong. That said, its skill ceiling again changes a little bit as it's a slightly different playstyle. It swaps to being very aim focused. You really need to hit your shots with this. Any missed shots and you're going to be in trouble. And spacing, because you want to stay at least medium to long range with your opponents. If you start getting in really close quarters fights, this build suffers heavily. This is speaking from experience, because you really don't have an option to clear someone when they're on top of you. So you have to be super, super creative and disengage and readjust yourself to try and get a favorable position. But people are gonna chase you and kind of keep the mid-range a thing. So just be a little bit careful when you're using this, and you'll be okay most of the time. Moving down to tier 4 and tier 5, we're going to pick up increased armor. The unfortunately, the improved tracking and ignore armor are on the same slot. If this was up here and this was down here, it would be a slightly different option, but it's not. Unfortunately, the crit really doesn't do anything for you, and that kind of sucks. So ignore armor is really just your better choice. It means your damage is always going to be the same, and keeping predictability high is nice. Moving into tier 5, these are unfortunately really bad options for how this build works. But your increased fall damage is up here. It's lower than it normally would be, which kind of sucks, but that's okay. These already have good enough damage that doesn't really matter. Your two options are shield piercing and increased shield damage. As you're already doing shield damage with your other weapon, you're taking shield piercing, but this does help you in a sense. What shield piercing does is it lets you shoot past any leftover shields, so you don't need to fully commit with ion cannons. You kind of need to get 2 shots in, and then the third remaining shields on your enemy will be cleared by the first shot of heavy laser, and then the follow-ups are going to be doing full damage. So it helps with the build a little bit, but it's not the strongest option in the world. These are, like I said though, these are still really strong. You kill people extremely quickly, especially if you're really accurate. You'll see a lot of mileage out of these really quickly. So that's all for the primary weapons. Like I said, you could really pick any of these and you'll be fine. I personally believe that the short range variant is close to the strongest. I would argue, again, they're all really strong in their own sense, but this really just has consistency and it really feels just clean, as you're not really moving out of range, you're staying in that short range, so you can just swap between the two as you need. But test them all out and see which ones you like. They're all solid and you'll do fine. Moving to secondary weapons, you have 3 amazing choices. That is really just the Starguard in a nutshell. You have good choices almost all the way down the list. So it's a really nice shield, or a really nice shield. It's a really nice ship offensively, as your offensive options are not restricted at all. Once again, I'm going to be doing these by range and not by preference or presentation or whatever. So we're going to start with cluster missiles. These are your short range options. These fall perfectly in line between these 2 ranges. It's slightly longer than rapid fire and slightly shorter than ion. It sits flat at the 5,000 mark, which is a good place to be, and have decently high damage. These work the same as rapid fire lasers. They actually fill the same role in this build. Once you clear with ion cannons, you're essentially gonna either kill them with rapid fire or kill them with clusters. They both don't have they both don't have a good way to deal with shields, but they do a lot of damage after shields are cleared. So you're gonna get a good bit of mileage from making sure you use your ion cannons before you cluster missile someone. That said, they're spammable. They have a short lock-on time and a really short reload. It's the fastest in the game at 3 seconds. It's half of concussion and a third of proton, essentially. So you can really, really spam these out. They're not the same spam type as the free-firing missiles that you'll see on scouts, but they're equivalent and will get you pretty decent in the short ranges. That said, these have the exact same skill curve as rapid fire. It's really just learning how to fight in short ranges. And locking on at short range is kind of awkward, but you get used to it. The firing arc isn't particularly low for cluster missiles. It's 28. It's not the highest in the world. It shares the same one with concussion, but it's mitigated by the fact that you can space yourself a little bit and still be okay. Tier 4 and Tier 5, these are interesting. This is an interesting predicament. For your Tier 4, when you're leveling this, it's weird, because at Tier 4 you have increased range, which is okay. It brings you to 5,500. It's not the best. Flat percentages on low range things is kind of weird. And you have increased ammo capacity. This is a flat bump, so it's just by 4. So it'll look like you'll have an ammo pool of 31, which is amazing. Or you'll have a slightly higher max range and get away with that. But the ammo capacity isn't great early. So if you're unlocking this and you get stuck at Tier 4, if you have anything else to level, I'd recommend leveling that. Otherwise, you're stuck with kind of a weird option. Where this comes into play is at Tier 5, where your options are double volley or plasma warheads. That long range aside, you will be picking up increased ammo capacity most of the time, unless you decide for some reason to take plasma warheads, but this is really the worst option. And that is because double volley, what it does is it fires 2 cluster missile volleys. It only eats 1 ammo, I think, so you don't necessarily... You're not losing 2 ammo, you're still firing 1 shot and firing 2 volleys. The second volley, it only deals 30% damage, but it completely halves your ammo capacity. So that 26 you have at base becomes 16, which is weird. I think it's just because my crew... Here, I'll change that to someone that doesn't have ammo capacity. There we go. So it's really 10. It's like 10 versus 20, and that really hits you hard, because having low ammo count on a spammable option is awkward, to say the least. So you really need that ammo capacity to bring you up to 12, because it's half of 4, so it's not great, but you again offset that by a crew option. I choose Zenith. Anything that has ammo capacity is nice in here, so like Arik, yada yada yada, stuff like that. But yeah, these are really strong. They don't actually do 683. They do more like 8 or like 900. It's kind of weird. It's close to 1,000, essentially, is what you need to pay attention to. So it's 2 clusters to kill someone, I believe. If you're firing rapid fires, of course, that changes it to 1. So essentially fire these off the second you clear ion cannons and have a good opening to do so, and you'll do fine. Moving to your second choice, we have concussion missiles. This is your medium range. I hate saying medium range because I said long range for primaries was 7,000. But for missiles, medium range is about 7,000 to 8,000. So this is your medium range option. That said, this is also used on the long range variant of the ship, unless you specifically want the true long range build. And what that means is you take proton, and then there's a lot of stuff you do in here per build that changes. I will briefly touch on that in this, as it's a little more important to the Starguard than it is any other ship. But we'll get to that when we get kind of further down the list. Or actually, when I get to protons, we'll talk about it. But since we're on concussions now, these are mid-range, sort of. They're good for sort of everything, really. They, again, don't do direct hull damage, but they have a really high base damage at 1055, 1100-ish, with some damage boost coming from somewhere. I don't quite know where that's coming from, but they hit really hard. They have a fairly short lock. It's 2.2. It's decent. It's the lowest of the non-short range options for offensives. It has a decent ammo pool at 16. It's not the best, not the worst. It's smack in the middle. And overall, the reload time is actually really nice at 6 seconds. It seems like a long time, but trust me, in practice, if you're getting kills with it, it'll feel really smooth, because that 6 seconds is mitigated by you finding another target. So unless you were just chain fighting people, you'll notice that it's long. But if you're not, and you're kind of able to pick someone off, take a second, find someone else, and then begin the chase, you'll have your missile up before you get to that person. These don't have they don't have a real learning curve. It's the same as any other missile/torpedo. The learning curve with lock-on weapons is learning how to bait. This means you are essentially locking on and holding it to see if they'll burn engines beforehand. If they don't, you're just releasing the missile and either accepting the fact that that missile is just straight up not going to do damage, it's going to be wasted, or your opponent's going to not use engines for whatever reason. Sometimes the new players don't. I have noticed that a lot recently. Some newer players that I haven't seen ever before are not using their engines, but that's neither here nor there. Use your engines, folks. They're really good. That's my PSA for the day. But you're going to kind of trick people into wasting their resources so you can use your missiles afterwards anyways. And like I said, since these don't have the shortest cooldown in the world, but they don't have the longest either, you can bait with it fairly effectively. More often than not, you'll probably get a kill with it, honestly. It's a very strong damage burst, and people don't really see it coming since you're kind of sitting in that mid-range. It's a fairly fast missile at base, so it's hitting, before most things would. That's really it. That's its skill curve. It's really the same skill curve as like protons and other stuff like that. At tier 4 and tier 5, tier 4, you don't really need ammo capacity on this. If you take it, you're losing a little bit of range, and that extra 700 meter range is significant. It basically lets you keep the lock while people are trying to run away from you, and it gives you a little bit of leniency on the range that you can do that at. So I personally believe that the increased range while losing out on ammo a little bit, again, you're not going to have 16. You're actually going to have less. Jorgen wasn't a good choice either. HK, there we go. You're actually going to have, since you don't run ammo capacity on these builds, you're going to have 12. At 12, there's an argument for this. Again, it's the same thing. Range is still good. More often than not, you're probably not going to live to 12. And if you do, hopefully you have a bomber with repair probes or a scout or anything like that to give you more ammo back. But generally speaking, you don't actually need ammo on this ship because your primaries are good enough. So use them as you will, but use them sparingly and, be smart about it. So increased range, really good. At tier 5, engine targeting sucks. Please don't use it here. This is not a utility missile. You really do not need the speed reduction, and you do not need the engine power drain, because that is, again, submitting to the I'm not going to kill you, so I need you to have less resources than me after the fact kind of mindset, and that's not what you want to have. You want to have the mindset that I'm going to kill you, and you're going to die before you get a chance to use your resources. So you take Ignore Armor, which gives this arguably it's not the highest burst in the game. I believe that's Yeah, that's still reserved to protons, as they do. No, actually, they never mind. These have the highest burst in the game because proton only does 1,000 at base. So these do have the highest burst of any missile essentially in the game, and just really hammer home. They're always doing 1,100 ish, so that's really good. If you for some reason are running the crit build, these can crit and do 1,500, which is pretty much always an insta kill. So that's nice. And yeah, overall, it's a good option. I tend to run concussion missiles if I'm running the quad lasers. I'll run it sometimes if I'm doing the concussion build, but it's or not the concussion. If I'm running the heavy laser build, it's more up to preference there. It's kind of weird. Concussions fill the same role in both of those builds, and as such, on my build sheet, there's actually separate builds that kind of blur the lines between each other, and to me that felt really annoying to type out because I really didn't want to admit that happens. But on the Stargun in particular, it's fairly noticeable, as you can run. I mean, you can run heavy laser with cluster missile and still be good. Like the ship really doesn't have a set build. It is the definition of personal preference in GSF. So run what you like. If you like concussion missile and you like rapid fire, you can totally make that work. Moving on to proton torpedoes, and I'm going to talk about them first and then talk about the implications for your minor components after. These aren't weird here. They aren't great, but they aren't terrible. What they fill, the role they fill, is a very high range burst option. And on a Starguard in particular, you don't have a good option to pair with it, because your ion cannons are more or less mid to short range, and the highest range you have is heavy lasers, which is 7,000. There is about a 4,000 meter gap in there where you're pretty much relying on proton torpedoes to do work for you. And while that's not a terrible thing to do, as they do provide the necessary killing power, the nature of these is they already ignore shields. You don't need that on the Starguard, so they're kind of weird. They do have a burn, which is nice. It's a hull damage burn again, but more often than not, these have low ammo pool, really high lock without committing stuff to it, and a really long reload time. So they're awkward to use on the ship, to say the least. People do it, and it's still okay because you can just sort of finagle the ship to do what you want with it. But going through it, like I said, these are more or less for your mid to long range builds. They have a very high burst, that 800 flat hull damage, and a 200 damage burn. That burn can be healed by Hydro Spanner, so be warned about that. Like I said, they're very long range. They clock in at 1150 on the correct build choice for these, and it's not. So the skill curve for these is the same as concussion missiles. The negative to them is that it has a high build cost to it for your minor components. That again, we'll get into after I explain the tier 4 and tier 5. Tier 4, and tier 5 for you are utility choices. You're taking increased firing arc here to bring it up to the 20-degree firing arc instead of 16, which is really low for missiles. Considering these two have 28 at base, asking you to essentially get a buff to just make these better is kind of silly, but it really does matter. You increase projectile speed. In my experience, its position was, it used to be a way to trick people into not using their engines, but people just use engines preemptively now or never at all. People aren't really min-maxing the duration of engines. They're not chasing out, or they're not letting a missile chase them out and then engineering at the end of the missile duration. They're really just letting it either hit them or just dodging it to begin with. So increased missile speed doesn't really do anything anymore. So you're taking the firing arc to make these feel a little bit smoother and allow you to chase people a little bit easier. At tier 5, I really didn't want increased ammo capacity to be down here. If it was here, I would man, this argument would be so easy. I'd say take increased ammo capacity so that you have at least 12 missile or 12 torpedoes, and that puts it kind of in line with concussion missile without any investment. But since it's down here next to increased range, which brings your range from 10,000 to 1150, you kind of have to take increased range. It's a 15%er, which is essentially the highest you can get out of a perk, to my knowledge. So it's really hard to argue against. There's not like a good reason to not take it, and you're unfortunately paying the price of having less ammo capacity for it, so that kind of blows. And committing ammo capacity to it is not a good idea. You're not gaining anything from having more protons, as these are really execute tools more than anything. So there's a lot of weirdness with protons on this ship. And moving into the thing about minor components, down here, you'll notice in my builds, if you look at my build guide, every single build changes. You never have the same magazine on any build. For like short range, you're taking power pool. For the heavy, or for rapid fire, you're taking power pool. Same sort of with quads. Quads, you really can pick between these two. But heavy laser, you're taking regen because you want the regen. And then the issue with proton is efficient targeting is on here. And what efficient targeting does is it allows you a way to make protons feel smoother in sort of the field that Starguard is meant to hold, as it brings your lock-on time to 2.1, bringing it along with concussion's base lock-on time. This is good, but there's always a but. You are losing out on some primary benefits. Having the increased regen on heavy lasers feels really good. Having the increased power pool on rapid fires is practically essential. It lets you just spray at people, and you're sort of losing out on the negatives of rapid fire in the fact that you can spray at people. Munition capacity, like I said, is never good. Please never take this. There's no reason why you need more secondaries as long as you're using them correctly. And if you're gonna commit something, commit a crew instead of a really good slot, because these three are just, or these two at least, are perfect for you. And this, it's good. Does it warrant protons being a mainstay on the ship? I personally do not think so. That said, a lot of other people tend to disagree, as this is a game of personalization. So if you want to take protons, I'm telling you right now, you should really take efficient targeting. There's no reason for you to not to, and you're really just shooting yourself in the foot if you don't. Otherwise, you're struggling with a 2.4 lock-on, which, while it doesn't seem long, that extra 0.3 seconds really does matter. It's the difference between someone getting behind cover and you letting your missile lock complete before they get there. And you're really asking a little bit more than I personally felt comfortable with the ship, so I personally just stick to using my primaries to get me through the game. So there's that. Moving into your shields, this is where the pick whatever you want kind of changes. All of these options are sort of relics of the past. Charge plating used to be amazing. There was an armor meta where this was really strong and hull damage reduction was really good. Feedback shield on strikes has never really been good. At least I don't think so. It doesn't really give you anything that you don't already have. It's extra damage on as a shield slot, which is okay, but it's not getting you anything useful. And directional shield, while it is okay on this ship, it's actually better. It's better on this ship than it is anywhere else, which is kind of funny. But that's mostly due to the nature of how you fight on the ship and not due to the beneficial nature of directional shields. So quick charge shield really is your best option. It's giving you a lot of good stats just from its base values, and it's giving you a really good active on a short cooldown when you hit tier 3. That said, it's a little bit expensive to hit tier 3, but You getting retro thrusters and quick charge shield early means your survivability just increases exponentially, and you become that extra bit more tanky that you really need for this ship to thrive. And quick charge shield allows you that. What its active does, it gives you a flat 30% chart recharge of your shield, which means if you're using this as a get out of jail free card, it can help do that. But what it does that is slightly more important, if you pop this preemptively, it's giving your shields max. It's giving your max shields a boost of 100%, meaning it's just flat out doubling your shield capacity twofold, and it's increasing your shield regen rate by 200% for 4 seconds. Now, 4 seconds doesn't seem like a lot. I know that much, but what this is doing is it is giving you overshields when you're in a power conversion. So if you're in engine power or weapon power, you'll notice your shields go into yellow. If you pop quick charge shield, they can actually go to full overcharge. I made the mistake in saying that there was no way to do that. Quick charge straight up gets you back to full overcharge from a non-neutral position. From a neutral position, these are getting you to overcharge plus, essentially, where it is that 200% increase of your shields. And it's nuts. It's a lot of survivability on a ship that you otherwise wouldn't think should have it. That said, minus the Clarion, these two ships both have that. The difference is in the engines, and we'll get into that right now, actually, after I tell you a few more things about quick charge. Sorry, these are getting rambly. As stated, quick charge shields actually have a low skill requirement. This is really nice for new players. Just you could pretty much use it, however, as long as you're using it. So you can use it reflexively and kind of use it as a reactive tool, which is nice. At tier 3, you're going to take reduced cooldown. This should be obvious. I really shouldn't need to explain this. It takes 30 seconds, makes it 20. The benefits of that kind of just write it for themselves. Having a shield boost on a 20-second versus a 30-second is good. For your engine choice, there are actually 2 solid options here, and a third option that I will mention, but will mention hesitantly. First thing I'm going to get out of the way, since we're on the first episode of Ship Breakdowns. If you watch this, keep this in mind for the entirety of the series. Power converters, I'm never going to acknowledge. They suck. There's no reason to use them. They're essentially berserker mode for the most part, where you're eating a really high negative impact for a really minuscule positive benefit, and that's not good in any way, shape, or form. Please never use these. They also have really awkward, they don't get you anywhere, and they're bad. Don't use them. That said, I'm going to go on to the 2 that I do think are good, and the third that I think is okay. Retro thrusters. This is the number 1 choice for the ship, and the reason being is retro thrusters, while they don't give you flat movement, what they do give you is the extreme creativity and ability to use these offensively. More times than not, I have noticed people that, generally speaking, they'll run the rapid fire build with this. You can run anything with it, and it actually works really well. You will retro thruster backwards, and this gives you enough time and space to get another shot or another series of shots in the retro thruster space. This does require a decent bit of aim as you are moving away from your target and kind of changing the way you're seeing where they are. But if you get really good at that, man, you can really do some crazy things with these. I've seen countless starred mains, to my knowledge, just straight up dominate a battlefield. I mean, I personally got 20-2'd by someone on the enemy team who continuously would just retro thruster in my face to clean me up, and it felt really bad as the person getting it done. But at the end of that match, I went, wow, that person really was they were really doing good. They obviously were the top of their team, and frankly, it was a domination match, so like, were they carrying the match? No. But were they making an impact? Oh yeah. They were keeping our team off points, and that let them win. So the more aggressive you can get with these, the better off you're going to be. Um, I put a note in my notes that says they have an extremely high skill ceiling. I hold true to this because their skill ceiling is not anything game mechanic related. It's personality related. Their skill ceiling is your creativity. The more you can do with the more you think you can do with these, the more you can do with these, because they will pretty much. I mean, the only thing they can't do is help you escape. Unfortunately, that is the one thing that these suffer from, is the fact that you're not really gaining distance, and their missile evasion, while there, is definitely not as long as other ones. It's 3 seconds, which actually I've noticed, and I don't know if this is how it actually is, or if it's some other way. I've noticed that it doesn't actually feel like 3 seconds. It feels like the duration for the missile lock is actually starting at the back of your retro thrusters, meaning once you hit the full reverse and start moving forward again, that's when it feels like it starts. So you're actually losing a good 1 to 2 seconds because you're waiting for the animation to end, and realistically, you're able to be locked onto really quickly. Again, I don't know if that's how it is, but that's how it feels. So keep that in mind. Using these to disengage a missile is good. Using these for that prevention of missile locks is not particularly great. That said, at tier 3, you're taking increased turn radius. More often than not, that's your choice for engines through and through on ships. It really just helps you track better, and in short ranges, it helps you turn really well. So it's overall just really good. Moving into the second choice, this is barrel roll. It's your defensive option to a degree. It's not going to help you offensively, in my opinion. There is an exclusion to this, being if you precharge a proton lock and are willing to make the commitment to do something weird, you can hold your proton lock, barrel roll through someone, and release your lock as you're getting past the person. So like as they're about to leave your field of view, you can launch the missile and it'll burst them, and it's kind of unexpected. But that's a really weird play, and you're eating a really good defensive for nothing really. And barrel roll isn't the shortest cooldown in the world, so you're kind of committing a lot to make a flashy play that really doesn't need to happen. The skill floor for these is low, which is nice. You're really using these as an escape tool more often than not, so that's kind of where the skill floor lies. If you're in a bad engagement, you're probably going to barrel roll away from a missile or what have you. They do have a small learning curve, though. Their movement is not flat, meaning you're not just going straight forward. You are going up. You're going vertically and horizontally a little bit throughout the turn, or throughout the motion. So, and in fact, it looks exactly as the image implies. You're kind of spinning and then exiting back out of your turn. So you can hit terrain if you're anticipating on moving through a really small space. You probably will hit an edge, and be a bit careful about that. Tier 3 again is increased turn rate. Increased ship speed there's an argument for it, specifically if you're running with the protons. I just don't think it's high enough of a boost, especially when you're not getting it anywhere else, for you to warrant taking. The third thing that I'm going to honorably mention, but it's not really. I see a lot of people use these, and while it is not the best option, I've been persuaded a little bit. Koyagrin, sorry, I've always been pronouncing it wrong. It's an O, not an A. Is essentially a 180-degree turn vertically. What this means is you are straight, just turning backwards. You're turning backwards and upside down, though, so you are following the natural curve of how your ship should turn. And what this does is it gives you a decent It gives you a decent bit of evasion, but it's a weird kind of evasion. It's predictable evasion. Now, what I have seen people do is I've seen people use these more like retro thrusters recently, where you are Koya on top of someone and essentially kind of disorienting them in that short range space. That is the argument that I give for these. They are okay as an offensive option. They aren't amazing. Retro thrusters is still better in every way, shape, and form, as it's just a more predictable movement and overall just has more benefits. Another thing that Koya does that I don't think it's necessary, but it's okay as a nice little kind of like topper to this. It does increase your accuracy on your primary weapons by 50% for the 4-second duration. It's okay. It's not great, but it's certainly not the worst thing in the world. It kind of lets you turn and then get a few seconds of just laser beaming people, which is nice. But as I stated, I don't think it's a great option. I personally think retro thrusters is better. But if you really feel comfortable with it and you prefer this over retro thrusters, you can use it to a decent bit of success. At tier 3, you're still going to take increased turn radius. Moving on, that is for the most part it with the ship. As I stated, minor components, we kind of went over that with protons. The crew, I'm going to reference in my build sheet as well as the rest of the components. The only two that this is the only slot that stays the same here, and that's why I'm saying this. On most other ships, it's a stagnant set that you take, but on this ship in particular, you have a decent bit of variance. So I recommend highly that you look at my builds for this ship and see if you can find one that you like. I pretty much have every combination that I believe makes sense on there. One or two of them I don't feel comfortable with, so I'm probably going to remove them. But for the most part, I have your short range, your mid range, and your long range, and then your extra long range on there as well. So yeah, that is it for the Starguard. It really just is a nice ship. That's all I have to say about it. It does the things well, it fights people well, and if you're going to learn with anything, learn with this. It has a nice little upgrade path for you, and I sincerely hope you see that, and you'll feel it as you kind of upgrade things and as you feel out which build you want to use. With the next video, we're going to be going over the Pike. The Pike is the Starguard's secondary cousin, brother, twin thing. It's really a twin. It's the same ship, but with missiles instead of guns. So we'll get into that next time. Good luck out there, pilots, and I will see you in the skies. You have a wonderful day. Bye-bye.